different world.
It was.
Yeah, it was
Like a forum magazine.
Yeah.
Give someone a blowjob to get into a club. It was easy, and that wasn't. That was terrible. It was a different world.
Yeah, it was a different world, and up until the age of 19, I thought I was kind of broke because I'm a therapist that fixes people who, are problematic, and I couldn't get off on dominating women.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I was thinking, I'm broken inside, until I was spotted by somebody in the BDSM world and thrown in the deep end. Yeah, but I've always known since I was 6 that was what was my driving force. But I've seen other people who are stuck to littles. I do a lot of work with the homeless and in mental health in London, who are stuck in that place through horrible abuse and trauma. Yeah, so I went for both. But what would you say?
Good question. What would you all say before I give my opinion? Are we born this way? Is it nature or nurture? Both. Anyone got a very distinct opinion on one or the other?
It might be individuals, so we say both, but it might not be both for one person, it might be one or the other.
Yeah, it might be, mightn't it? That's interesting, isn't it? So it might not be.
And we can evolve it as well, so we can choose.
Yeah, we can make choices, can't we?
Yeah.
It's an interesting one for me. They're going to play bingo. I'm really sorry because I'm going to mention a word that's really important to me. So when they play bingo, what they really mean is I use a word that I use fairly often because a lot of my answers and a lot of the discussions come up as standard. And Laura's the worst fucking person on the planet to do this.
Hi, Laura.
She's part of the crew. She's great to go to. She's a very good rope bunny. She knows what she's doing as well. So she's a really good person to ask questions of as well.
And also I can't for the right.
She's also a pain in the arse when she's in this room. So, for me, I've been looked at doing 2 PhDs, and one of them is the transgeneration and epigenetic scripting of sex.
Bingo!
Right, so what do I mean by that? When we have trauma or we have experience of something in our lives, it can mean that has actually passed down genetically from previous generations. So the argument is that potentially the shit you are dealing with in your life is not yours. You might think it is, but it belongs to your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents somewhere way back when. However, it's been passed down. What we know is when somebody experiences a trauma or something not particularly pleasant, define trauma, we'll be here for another hour. So when somebody experiences something that's traumatic to them, what we know is that it changes, changes isn't the right word, it influences our DNA structure. It's a better way of putting it, it influences. We have these things called mitochondria. We have a protein that's created when we experience something. So extreme fear or extreme of anything, it wraps itself around the DNA and it sends a message to the next generation. So you have a genome. Your genome is your book that says what colour skin you're going to have. It says what colour eyes you're going to have. It has some real basics. So let's look at just even the colour of our skin. It could be that you have an Asian set of parents who have a white baby and a black baby. How the fuck did that happen? That's because 30 generations ago or 20 generations ago, there were different genes involved in that baby. Now, often, what most men will say, who have you been fucking? The first question should actually be, gosh, I wonder what the genetics are in our history because I trust you, darling. That should be the first one. It really is. It really is. So, and that's a shame. So we need to ask questions about this sort of stuff. So my mum died in May. She had a history of abuse in her family, her uncle, different things. So does her abuse impact me as a human being? Am I trying to rectify her abuse by becoming a submissive? Am I influenced by that abuse because I'm a submissive, or is it my upbringing? I didn't know about it in my mum till I was in my 30s. She never mentioned it before. However, do I know because of the way she parented? It's a really good question. So epigenetics definitely come into it. We know if you look at all the research that's been done, really good research, not light research, and that shows that this sort of stuff can go back over, it's been proven 16 generations, which means it just goes on and on and on. And there's an experiment done on mice. I'm sorry if you're really not against cruelty and everything. I really understand where you're coming from. However, this experiment was done where they exposed mice to the smell of cherry blossom at the same time as torturing them, took the torture away. The mice had the same brain response to the smell of cherry blossom every time it came in. For any of you who's into psychology, maybe heard of Pavlov's dogs? Yeah, ring the bell, salivate. I feel a bit like that sometimes, actually. Ciao.
Next time, ring a bell.
We need a bell. I need to stop shouting bingo.
Or, you know, I can feel the same sexually. If someone triggers that right thing in my mind, boom, I can be on my knees fairly easily. I have to watch that. So, you know, it's like, because that's how I feel, that's how I am. So I'm a pretty submissive woman, although most people think I'm a dominatrix. So, because I'm fairly confident as well. I know it's a shock. Really confident, intelligent women can also be submissive. I know. Really can be.
Shock terror.
But we can be. So it's really important that we understand where we came from and our history and our heritage. It's good to have an understanding of where and why. And then with these mice, which was different to Pavlov's dogs, what they did is they turned round and they let the mice give birth. And what they found was the next 6 generations, even with no exposure to the parental mice that were abused in the first period, had 100% traumatic response in their brain to the smell of cherry blossom. So in other words, their DNA had taught them to be scared. If you want to see it in humans, look up a woman called Rachel Yehuda. So I talk about this stuff quite a lot. So Rachel Yehuda is a psychiatrist in New York. She's done a lot of work in Edinburgh about epigenetics with an epigeneticist. She worked with Holocaust survivors, and that's my heritage. And my heritage is Jewish. So she worked with Holocaust survivors. And what she found was that she would say, well, this is interesting, isn't it? So these people are frightened of people in uniform. Frightened of people who, like, frightened of getting on a train. Yeah, I would be, I think. And poured food in their bag. And that's the generation that survived. You know, tattoos and everything on their arm. Clearly, it's ironic, isn't it? Because I have my slave number written on my arm. I never miss the irony of that as a Jewish woman. I'm like, interesting. So, you know, it's what they found. Then she found that the next generation were similar. So can you argue that the children are just a sum of their upbringing, or can you argue that the children are influenced genetically in some way, shape or form? What they found was the children had very similar situations. So did they listen to horror stories as children? Did they have an influenced upbringing? No, darling, we don't get on trains. We always take a car or something along those lines. And what happened? And what they found was one of the markers for this is cortisol in your system. So when you are stressed, highly stressed, it is normal as your stress levels rise that a certain amount of cortisol will release itself in your system and say, shh, it's okay, just calm down. It's okay. It won't literally say that because you'll go, fuck off, that doesn't work. You ever tried that with someone who's really stressed? Calm down. Never works. So on a chemical level, cortisol calms us down. Good thing. It's not a good thing if you have a shit ton of cortisol in your system. Anyone here, old like me, has things like, or a sporting injury actually, so where you have things like you get steroids injected into any of your joints. Anyone ever have that ever? Okay, so like for you, for example, do you mind if I ask you, like how often are you allowed to have that done?
So because my back injury is pretty severe, I need to have it like once a year, once every 18 months.
So why do you think it's only once a year every 18 months? Did they explain it to you?
Yes, it is something to do with the longevity of the how long it takes for the steroid to start working and then recede.
Maybe what they missed off, and some of you may or may not know this, is if we keep putting steroids into your body won't create steroids after a while because it expects them from an external force, and it will also give you a heart attack. It will kill you. We can't keep creating that level of steroid in our system over long term. So anybody who is highly, highly, highly stressed, ironically what happens, if you were to give them a blood test, we don't do this, we don't, Jesus, the whole world would come out stressed and have a lot of problems. So what happens is, when you're highly stressed, your cortisol levels aren't normal, they are below normal. That's how we can tell someone's stressed, and that's the work that they did. What they found was that second and third, even maybe fourth babies' generations were actually very low in cortisol. The thing that sealed the deal for them on this particular piece of research was that 9/11 happened. They asked every pregnant woman who was at any point of her term of her pregnancy to come forward. They said, can we take bloods from your baby? Did you find 9/11 traumatic? If they were involved in some way, maybe they watched it on the TV and they had a panic response that maybe a sibling or an aunt or an aunt, some relative was there. Maybe it was just so awful to watch and to look at because maybe they lived in New York. Hundreds of women came forward who were giving birth at that time. I often say this, guess how many of the babies were born highly stressed, their genome already, a lot scratching out saying you've got to be this certain way, because life's really awful, if the placenta was intact, how many of the babies were born with post-traumatic stress disorder?
All of them.
100%. 100% of those babies were born with PTSD. Now, under the administrations that then came after them, they were well looked after. I'm really sorry if you're a Trump fan, because I'm not, until him. And then he pulled the plug on all the therapy and the help that those kids were getting. Well, they were a lot older by then, but he pulled the plug on it. Those kids needed a lot of help. They've gone on to develop all sorts of problems alongside PTSD, because PTSD has so many comorbidities. Anorexia, depression, all sorts of different things that happen. So my answer is, it is both. However, what I will say is you have a genetic predisposition of some kind due to something in your genetics. And therefore, if that is brought up or highlighted in some way, that might be the case. It might be a very tiny genetic predisposition. What we also know, if somebody is hurt continuously, we have to work out a way how to live with that. That's fairly awful, to be hurt, to be cruelly looked after by so-called caregivers. So what a lot of children do is warp it in their minds to be some kind of caring, some kind of be okay. How many people do you know who you think are in really abusive relationships and you think, why do you keep fucking finding that person? Why are you always with someone who's horrible to you? Anyone have a friend like that or know anyone like that? Mm-hmm. Even themselves? Why do I keep fucking picking workaholic cunts? Oh yes, that's me. So like it happens to all of us, doesn't it? So it's interesting. It's because we repeat certain habits and certain things, because somehow in our minds what we can do is we create our own mental path to say, this is okay, I like this. So for some people who are trying to relive trauma in BDSM, don't do that. I'm really sorry, I've got a very strong opinion on that. Get your trauma sorted and then come into it if that's what you want to do. But get your trauma sorted, or do it at the same time as you're getting your trauma sorted. Because a lot of people will come into BDSM and say, well, I had this trauma, I'm trying to relive it, I'm trying to do this stuff, and I feel really good, I feel in power. Great, until that person fucks up just one tiny time. And then the whole trauma. And your body, if you read anything by Bessel van der Kolk, Rebecca Rothschild, Daniel Siegel, really good people to look up if you have some kind of trauma. They tell you what happens in the brain. It's really good to know what happens in the brain. PTSD and anorexia are the only two forms of mental health that actually physically change your brain structure. All the other mental health issues do not. Something going on there. Yeah. So they're the only two things that actually change your brain. So if you have a problem with either of those things, go and see a therapist who is trained in those things properly, not somebody who just does talking therapy. Then talking therapy is great. I do talking therapy. However, make sure you see someone who is properly trained around trauma and eating disorder, because you have to reconfigure the brain. And you can't just feed someone, just have a meal and you'll be fine. Oh, yes. Wish I'd thought of that. Fucking I'm depressed. Get up then. Really? Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. But I mean, some of it is that as well. Some of it is, right, we need to change what you're doing every day. We need to change what you're eating. We need to change the way you think and feel. That's quite complex because we get stuck in our patterns as to what we do and why. So the answer is both. Some people have more of a disposition to something. And also some people will have a response to something that is abusive or difficult and then sexualize it or fantasize it to make it okay, because it's much better to say, yeah, but I like that and I chose it. So the answer is both, with some frilly edges. You were going to ask something there.
I wasn't actually, I was just existing, sorry.
Are you sure? It's okay, all right.
Is that what is eroticized pain?
Yes, eroticism, yeah. So eroticism, so for example, by the way, if I say one of my clients, number one is, I even have clients in this room, you will not know who they are. It's none of your business. My clients have complete privacy and confidentiality as far as I'm concerned. Also, what my clients have is a question I ask at the beginning. I talk a lot. I do a lot of talks. I supervise other therapists. Can I use your story? Do I have consent to use your story? 80% say yes, roughly, 20% say no. So I never share that 20%. So when I say something, I say it with their consent. Because a lot of people say, I don't want to use my fucking therapist, how dare you use my story? I think we find I ask. Consent is really important to me. It didn't exist in the 80s and 90s in the BDSM scene. It is a modern thing, consent. It really is. Please be aware of that. It is a modern thing, crazy as that sounds. So we will eroticize things. I have a client who was sexually and physically abused by her father and her grandfather from the age of 5, and she has a real eroticism around sweets, because they'd give her a packet of sweets and she would just eat that packet from the age of 5. She would just eat them out of the packet, and she still feels that same way about sweets. So she has a really complex relationship with sweets. They're erotic. She can feel turned on when she eats. It sounds funny, so I'm sorry if it sounds funny, and it's okay to laugh because we all have black humour when it happens, but she's very turned on by a packet of fruit pastels. Kind of funny, it's kind of not. And we know that that's really serious and that really matters. So the eroticism gets connected, which creates interesting neural pathways. And we change our neural pathways. Our neural pathways aren't set. When you're born, you don't have any. Boom, you come into the world, you create fucking billions. We used to think it stopped. If you actually look at a baby who's been breastfed, or even maybe bottle fed, but less so, but breastfed, definitely that eye connection creates millions and millions of incredible neural pathways in a baby's brain. It's why we need connection. And it doesn't stop. We used to think it stopped in adults. It doesn't. Even at my age, they're still ticking along. Maybe not as quickly as yours, but they're still there. They're still moving, which is why we know we can maybe do more stuff about things like Alzheimer's and different things. So the research proves that actually if you learn a language in your 30s and 40s, or you keep yourself learning, you're less likely to have problems with Alzheimer's. Doesn't mean you're not going to get it. It's a bit like the COVID vaccine. You're still going to get it, potentially. It's just like less chance. And that's the sort of impact that it has. It'll probably upset about 30 people politically right now. She's just had her third booster and her arm's really hurting her. She's like, how? So all of these things, the genetics and the influence that we're in have a huge difference. Where I live, I have the back of, sort of like over that way, over the back of my house at the bottom of my garden is like an old people's, it's not a home, it's like a warden assisted type living where people can live. And we've had 2 cat killings recently. Somebody beheaded 2 cats. I have 2 cats.
Do you still have the 2 cats?
I still have my 2 cats. It's a little bit, but it's scary, isn't it? It's a horrible thing to think about. I live near Brighton, so we also had a cat killer a couple of, I think last year he was given 6 years.
Yeah, I remember that story.
Yeah. So we've clearly got a new one pops up and it's quite near me. Now that person will keep coming in waves, potentially. Funny, but
That was not me.
for all the cat lovers, you're in trouble when you walk upstairs.
That was not me this time.
It wasn't
For
you
the
that
record.
time. They could be very catty, be careful. Right, so, right, stop. Right, so the problem, let's keep going. Right, so what we've got to be careful with that person, it's awful that they're killing cats. However, that person is statistically very likely, if they keep doing it, that they graduate to human beings. Because people who kill animals also end up killing humans. That's a very high percentage. They start with small beings and they work their way up.
Like an Amazon recommendation. Kill the animals.
Okay, moving on. So, moving on. But what you can guarantee is if you meet a serial killer who has done that sort of thing, you can also guarantee they have trauma in their past. You can guarantee some form of child abuse. You can guarantee some form of cruelty. You can guarantee certain things. And with BDSM in history, it's also quite interesting. You can guarantee certain things in certain ways with us as human beings. And if not us, our parents or our grandparents or somebody else. And then our environment allows for us to do this. Now, some of us fantasize about this when from the age of 3, 4, 5, 6. I want to be tied up. I want to watch Cowboys and Indians. You said that frequently, didn't you? Your young fantasies of, like really, I didn't. So I didn't have any of those childhood fantasies.
It wasn't a fancy, we played, it was a game we regularly played.
Yeah.
That I really enjoyed.
Yes. And quite didn't know why, maybe.
Yes, I won.
My mum was one of 17 kids. I have a huge number of cousins. 17.
Wow.
Huge number of cousins. As far as I'm aware, I'm the only one that's kinky. We all tied each other up, both ropes and chains. I have one kinky aunt. But, yeah.
So it's in families, it's whether it's brought out potentially or not. My sister is very straight-laced compared to me. I've got 4 daughters, and they're very different human beings. I know the eldest is, she's come here actually, didn't she? More than once, even for Mother's Day once. I mean, that's just. But also, maybe. But there's a big agreement. Like if she's ever going to come to a party, I ain't staying. Like that is a line. I'm not interested. I don't care how dressed we both are. Even I'm out. I don't care. Like that is not for me. It really isn't. And, you know, I've also got daughters who have queer sexualities like I do, but I've got daughters who are very heterosexual. I say, like, it's really interesting, isn't it? What brings it out and why as to what it happens. So it is a variety of all of those things. Yes.
With like this and how you can trace a lot of kinks back to something which happened in the past or even generational trauma.
It's not related to trauma.
Thing that I'm
saying you're all traumatized.
That's kind of what my question is about. Is like, how do we balance this thing where there is a lot of trauma in the BDSM community? Like, you find that out immediately that a lot of people do work through stuff. Sometimes they have a professional on the side. Sometimes they're literally just using it. And there is kind of this stigma where, like, some of the little people, when they hear that someone's like in BDSM wants to be tied up, it's like, oh, what happened? Like, how do you, as someone who's involved in both psychology and kink, like, what do you think is that balance? How do you think we can address these issues and, like, address that this is a real thing? Wow.
Yeah. So for the first, if I get a question like that, I turn it around straight away and the person say, "Gosh, what's happened to you that makes you think that's a problem?" That's the first thing I'll say. Talk me through your question. That's a really nice one. It's easy. It's not offensive. Talk me through your question. What's going on for you asking that? Right, so no, not you now, but that's what I would say to that person, right? That's what I would say to that person, because they want you to justify. They want you to say, "Oh my God, there must be something awful." Yeah, actually, I was abused by my dad, and then therefore, like, "Oh, phew, thank that for that." Because please remember that when we look around, let's just look at some statistics. 6% of the UK are LGBTQI. We're queer, we're lesbian, we're gay, whatever. 4% of us are polyamorous in some way, shape, or form. Not a lot. I find that a shock when I remember that 6%. Sometimes when I think, fuck, oh yeah, that's because they're my friends. That's right, that's my crowd, that's who I run with. And it's probably 80%. It's not, certainly not 6. It's always a shock to me when I remember. But also, if you look at all the figures and statistics for us trying kink, if you take kink as a spectrum, over 90% of us have tried some kind of kink. And again, I would twist it and say, it's interesting that you asked that, but you've never tried a little bit of slap and tickle? You've never fantasized about someone holding you down a bit or calling you a name in some way, shape, or form? What do you imagine kink is? That's another one I love. What's going on for you? What do you imagine kink actually is? Well, you know, it's that thing where they put those big nails into your cock and your balls, and you're like, maybe.
Yeah, as well.
However, how many people do you know who do that here? The statistic is small. Most of us exist in a very different window. Do I think it's about trauma, everything else as well? No, I can tell you now, I had no major trauma as a child. I'm a very privileged human being. I've had major trauma in my 20s. Moving forward, I've been raped and put in a hospital for 3 days. I was absolutely unconscious. I've had major house fires. I've had a daughter being born dying. I've had a sister who had cancer. I've had cancer. Like, it just goes on and on. Like, I can give you a list of really traumatic type events. A hideous divorce, losing where I lived twice, having lots of money, having no money. Like, really, I can give you all sorts of different things. But was it awful as a child? No, which actually means my foundations are different. They are slightly different. I think there is a balance. You know, often. You do know. There's a film, this is to the older people probably. Anybody seen the Meryl Streep film where she, they're called Sophie's Choice?
Yes.
Yeah. So the film is an interesting one. So it's all about this young woman, young middle-aged-ish, actually, that's unfair.
Was it a book too? Was
It is a book. It
Was
is.
a book before?
It is, yeah. And in this book, what the choice is about, you think it's about the two men that she's with, but actually it turns out to be a much deeper story than that. It turns out that when her father was on the side of the Nazis, but then something went wrong. He was Polish and she was taken into a camp. And she's a very pretty, glamorous type woman walking into the camp, and one of the officers clearly takes a fancy to her and goes over to her and says, "Come here." And he says, "Make a choice." She's got 2 children with her. She's got a son and a daughter. This isn't true to the film. This is a rough synopsis. Make a choice. She says, "What do you mean?" He says, "One goes over there, one stays with you." That's a gas chamber. She knows. And she said, "I can't make that choice. You can't make me make that choice. I don't know." And he says, "Well, if you don't, I'm going to shoot them both in the head." She made a choice. She knew. She knew. We often know, but what we've turned off in ourselves is our pilot light and our system to know what's good for us. If you have a severe history of trauma, the likelihood is that you don't always know what's good for you. because you replay what's happened and why. I would certainly go and see somebody who really knows what they're talking about. I would listen to friends who care, not friends who think they care. Some friends give an opinion because they think they know better than you. Some friends give an opinion because they care. There's a difference. So I would look at my friendship group and I would ask, what do you think?
Listen.
Sorry?
And some people just listen.
Some people just listen. Yeah, and listening can be very good statistically. It can be really helpful. It helps you as a sounding board to work things out. You ask the question, do you think you know what's good for you and what isn't?
I think I know where stuff comes from, yeah. I don't know if I know what's good for me, though.
It doesn't matter.
The historical evidence.
It doesn't matter as long as it's not harming you now.
Yeah.
This is the other thing, isn't it? This is the thing about trauma. My job as a trauma therapist, and I do think you have to have a specialism in it, I really do. We were talking about this earlier because Karis is a counsellor and, you know, she's sending someone to see someone else because they've got trauma training. It's not a basic training. You don't get taught trauma as a therapist. You have to go and do a specialist course. So I think it's really important, not necessarily to see a therapist, but we don't always know what's good for us as human beings. We know deep down, but if that's had a lot of shit piled on top of it, it's so hard to see, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Well, I'll ask my clients, well, do you think that's good for you? Would that be good for a friend if you were recommending it to a best friend? Is there a repetitive pattern? Is it working for you? Is this working for you? Because a lot of people say, well, no, you know, okay, why do we keep repeating it? And that's Einstein's definition of insanity, isn't it? Repeating the same thing again and again and again, expecting a different result, because that's what we do as human beings. We do the same thing and we expect the world to be different. They don't work that way. You've got to be different. We are accountable for our own stuff, and that's the horrible thing with BDSM as well. This isn't about victim blaming. You are responsible for your safety. Only you. Because that fucking wanker who wants to do something to you doesn't give a flying shit. Some are beautiful and really care. Make a difference, will ask, look at consent. And some will come in, I don't know if you've seen the film Promising Young Woman, some will come in on that white night and say, I'll rescue you, have another drink before I fuck you. You know. So there are people that pretend to be good as well. So we have to be very careful about our own safety. Do I then think that that's the right way that the world is, looking at all the, you know, if you look at what happened in the Everard case, Sarah, and what's happened recently, and, you know, you look at all his chats that he's been having with his mates, he was known as the rapey friend. So, yeah, fucking hell, come on. What century do we live in? He was known as that person. They were having racist, misogynistic conversations as a group of people. He showed indicators and signs. He was red flagging everybody. So can you trust everyone? No. You've got to think about yourself, about what works for you and what doesn't. If you feel that something is cathartic and good for you, that can be great. The problem with redoing and using BDSM for trauma is that your brain doesn't process it properly. So when you have a trauma, if you have a piece of memory, I've spoken about this a lot. So if you imagine the brain is like a sieve, the brain's got a sieve over it. Anyone here a neuroscientist? Because you're about to cry the way I say this. Or a psychologist, but this is the best explanation for me. If you imagine there's a sieve over the brain, when your memory comes down, certain bits of it go through, some stays on the top. We then put that into different compartments as to how we remember it, what we do. Isn't it strange? You've got a different part of your brain that remembers all those lyrics, even if it was to fucking Baccarat and Yes Sir I Can Boogie or something. I can still fucking sing that with my sister. That's just strange, isn't it? But I can't remember some kind of mathematical equation that might help me in my life. The brain is strange, and the pressures we put on our brain are interesting. When you have a trauma, that sieve twists, it turns, and it doesn't allow a lot of what we see as memory to be processed and to go through, which is why, again, we were talking about this just upstairs, so if you have a personal experience one-to-one, whether that's an assault or an attack of any kind, your word against somebody else isn't good enough. It's not that it's not good enough. It's because memory can't be trusted. Memory does a very strange thing to us. So we don't process memory in that same way. So often what happens is people who want to recreate trauma within BDSM can really work for people for years. It could be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. It could really, really be good. And you go, fucking loving this. This is so cool. However, your body remembers in a different level, on a cellular level, and just one moment could mean it go boom, and you are in a very dangerous position where you might lash out, or you might lash out internally, or you might do something because the trauma has been hit in some way, shape or form, whereas it hasn't before. So my advice is always to be very careful, be aware. I ran a workshop the other day, quite a few months ago. So many. And this person came in and they felt angry. I mean, really angry to me. That is a professional opinion. They were very angry, very cross about life. And we were talking about trauma because it was one of the questions that had been asked. And then they were saying, so you saying to me, I can't fucking play because I'm traumatized and no person will see me as a therapist and no one will do this and no one will do that. Is that what you're saying? Because I might be dangerous to somebody else. Is that what you're saying to me? And I said, yes, I am. I am. As a responsible human being, I'm saying, if you get to that point and you lash out, you do something that's dangerous or dangerous to yourself or others, yes, I'm saying you should sort that shit out before you play. How dare you tell me I can't play? I'm not. I'm saying I don't think you should. You have your choice. That's up to you. You asked for my opinion. I've given it to you. So I think we have to be careful. Are we a danger? It's a fucking good question to ask ourselves anyway, isn't it, in life? You know, am I making that person feel uncomfortable if I'm this close to them? Am I making that person uncomfortable if I walk on the same side of the street as them? Should I cross the road? I think they're really good questions to ask ourselves as human beings. If I'm in a BDSM situation and I start doing something really weird or out of the normal, I don't know what that word means, out of what's expected or won't hurt somebody else, then yes, I would say that trauma is potentially an issue.
So I have a question. So we were talking about how as adults we have a responsibility to look after ourselves. However, I feel like on occasion I personally have experience where I don't want to do something, but I do it anyway because I don't know how to say no out of fear of making another person upset.
Yeah.
How do we, I don't know, I guess basically when
how
do we say no? How do we?
You say it by saying no. Okay, facetious fucking answer. That's called fawning. It's a trauma response for many of us. Lots of us want to please other people. Lots of us want to make the other person okay before we make ourselves okay. Lots of us don't worry about upsetting, especially if we're women, especially if we're submissive. We're way more likely to do that statistically. Young men are more likely to do that statistically. People who are transitioning or worried about their gender are also more likely to do it because they want to be liked. I want to be accepted. Way more likely to do that if you are any form of queer spectrum, because we're scared. Because people say horrible things, people do horrible things. So we're scared. It's easier to say yes. Did you want to get out? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Are you sure?
To change position.
So what we've got to remember is when we have a trauma response, often what we talk about is fight or flight. People have heard of that? Mm-hmm. Stand up for a fight. Mm-hmm. The third one is freeze. There is also friend, fuck, flop, foe, fawn. We like the Fs. There's a lot of Fs. I have a really extensive writing. It is not mine. I copied it and I give the person credit. It's about fawning. It's really important that you practice to start saying no, but the way we practice to start saying no is by picking small things in our lives and realising that we'll be okay. I think if somebody can't say no, it can be a good idea to have some therapy because I don't want you to be put into a dangerous situation ever. However, practicing saying no on small things. So if I were to say, what's your name? Am I allowed to ask your name?
Oh, Sage.
Sage. Pretty name. Hello, Sage. Right, so if I say, hey, Sage, should we get a takeaway tonight? What do you fancy? Do you often say, I don't mind, you choose, I'm easy, whatever?
I'm actually pretty good at stating my boundaries usually, but it takes someone getting to the point where they overstep my boundary, like to a nth degree. Like the other day I went to the club and I was dancing with this guy. I didn't want to dance with him. I didn't like him in that way, but I did it anyway because I felt like I had to. And then he tried to choke me on the dance floor. And that's when I pushed him, and he licked me as well. And I didn't say no, I didn't severely push him, but I kind of bunched him away and then I went off. And it takes getting to that point before I can actually say no.
So I want you to practice your boundaries beforehand when you are comfortable so you stop pushing them. So you say to me, I don't mind, I'll have a Chinese or I'll have a pizza. And I say, yeah, but I really want a pizza. And then you say, well, actually, I kind of fancy Chinese more. Yeah, but I want a pizza. I want a fucking pizza, Sage. Like, we can have an argument about this. And I start to get in your face because people are really weird. They do, don't they? And then we give in because we become scared. Look, everybody went, oh, fucking hell. Everyone has realised then that is sexual assault. That is assault. That's assault and sexual assault. However you look at it, that's what's happened. Do we go to the police and sort that shit out? No. I mean, Jesus, if we all did that as human beings every day, my God, most people would be arrested. It's quite shocking. I have a real issue with choking at the moment. I'm going to pick up on that one slightly and I'm going to come back to what you're saying. I have a real issue with choking. Anyone here like being choked? Great, put your hands down. Anyone here like choking someone else? I'm going to pick on you because I know you. Do you have a qualification on how to resusc?
Yeah, no, I know first aid.
Okay, do you?
Yeah.
Okay, who else put their hand up instead of choking? Do you have a qualification? Do you? Or experience? Do you? Okay, do you? Who else does and doesn't?
I
Do you? Okay. Please say it to you and say it to others. If you want to choke someone, go and do first aid first of all on how to resuscitate them if something goes wrong. Please. It's the most popular thing. If you look at TikTok at the moment, Freak Talk, that's a part of it. If you look at the amount of young women who are saying, I fucking love being choked, please choke me out. Do you understand what choking does? Do you understand the difference between a blood choke and a hold of the throat? Do you understand what happens around here to your esophagus and the damage that you can do? Do you understand here that we have cartilage that can be broken and can be really, really damaged? Do you understand that by blood choking me has a different implication to air choking me on the impact on the brain and what that's going to do? Mm-hmm. Do you understand how to resuscitate me and what's going to happen in case you keep me under for too long? Mm-hmm. Because the way most women have died in BDSM in the last 5 or 6 years is through choking. And actually, there is also a percentage of men who, so I'm not man-hating, that sounds like I am, I'm really sorry. The percentage of men who are using BDSM as a fucking defence, she consented to it, she likes being choked. Mate, you had 23 fucking beers on the way to see her, she didn't consent to that. Was it 28? Oh, who was it, that last one? There was a woman choked and he had 23 or 28 beers. He drove to her house. He would have got more years for driving than fucking killing her because she consented to it. He ended up with a few years. It's really important that you learn to say no. However, what you've got to look at is the history of why you don't, what that means, and what you're scared of. If I stand up for myself and I say no to you, what's the paranoid fantasy that you think is going to happen? Do you want to be liked? Is it that you want to be cared for? Is it that you can't because somebody might do something? Is it fear? Like, what is it stopping you from saying no? I'm not asking you. That's a question for you to find out. Start saying no to more things. Nothing that will get you in trouble. Do you want to lose your job tomorrow or something? Can you come in? No, fuck off. Like, no. I'll come back to you, I promise. You have to learn to say yes, right? Well, of course we do. However, what's your yes worth if you can't say no? But I'm a big believer in that. Your life, you are worth more than that. You've got to work out why you do that. Because it could be a trauma response. I don't know your history. I'm not going to ask you here. If you have a history of trauma, then you could fawn. You could be doing other things. It's really important to find that out. If it's not trauma, it could be on a lighter level. Still not lighter if we're not saying no, by the way. What does it mean? Why are we doing that? What's the implication of that? It's really important for you to investigate that. And if you are the person putting your hands on someone's neck or doing something to them, this is really innovative. Stop it. Fucking hell. Come on. Why are we doing those things? Why do we assume that we can touch other people? Pregnancy is a classic. The amount of people that go, oh, you're pregnant. Okay, could you not touch me? I'd really appreciate it if you didn't. Consent is such a big thing. I run a really big workshop on consent, a huge one. And if you're on FetLife, I've got a massive writing on it. I've also got writings on fawning, trauma, what happens if someone's having a panic attack. All of those things could help you in some way, shape or form. Have a look. Jim is responsible.
I was going to say, if anyone needs links to those, I'm the more you're on FET.
He links. He's been so sweet, and what he's doing is trying to put it into a database for me because I have like nearly 500 or 600 writings.
I think we need
Four or five.
an extra. We need to get you an extra sketch for live events. So
So I've got a lot, but all of these
Yeah.
things could help potentially. Read, get educated about yourself. However, getting educated in your brain doesn't change your function underneath. It's the connection between those things that matter. You can know logically not to do that, but your whole being is going, I'm just going along with this now. And we fawn, we respond. You've got to remember that if somebody is raped, especially let's go for somebody who's cis-born, female, woman. If a woman is raped, it's very likely she's going to get wet. That is not consent. Wet is not consent. Wet is a defense mechanism that we have so that when you shove, whatever you're going to shove inside me will not damage me. Wet isn't always about being turned on. Like, please can we get that as human beings? Fucking, well, she was wet. Oh, God. Was it raining, you wanker? I mean, come on. She loved it, she came. Oh, let's look at that one. 30% of women come from penetration. 70% do not. If you are a woman and you are raped and you come physiologically through penetration, you can also come when you are raped. Imagine what that feels like. It is not consent. So all of these things, we trauma response to them for all sorts of reasons, fear and all sorts. And it could be in your genetics, it could be in your life. You were going to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Sage, because I did have a similar background. I do have mental health issues. I had my suicidal attempt a couple of years, well, over a decade ago. So what helped me in setting up my boundaries is, first of all, do I care about the person or do I care about myself more? Like, what would happen to me if I didn't say no? And it helped me tremendously because I used to be exactly like that, even worse sometimes. But you will never see that guy again. You'll never, if he can destroy your life forever if you don't say no, but you'll never say again, and he will not give up to you in 5 minutes, you know? So that was one thing. And the other thing is that I'm a project manager by day, and I'm terribly logical at my work. The moment I transition to that part, I just switch off. I do look at myself, do look very diligently at the moment where that switch is closed, and I never get myself. I try to pull myself out of that, saying no zone, or not being able to say no zone as soon as possible. So just as a word of advice, it helped me very, very, very much. So hopefully something will help you as well.
Practice it. It's okay because Brené Brown talks about the story. I talk about the paranoid fantasy. We have a paranoid fantasy in our head that says, if I do that, that's going to happen. If I do that, this is going to happen. And we're thinking that, even though we're not logically thinking it when something is happening to us. That story is replaying in our heads again and again. Yeah, but if I do this, that'll happen. It's not even conscious. This is what our subconscious is doing to us all the time. Yeah, but when I did that, that happened. When I do that, that's what happens to people. I can't do that because that happens. And we fall into a cultural and an experiential bias of those sorts of things. And it's really important that we challenge them and we practice challenging them. Is that easy? No. Of course it isn't. It's really, really difficult. But your life won't change unless you change that. I want every man and or woman and or non-binary human being in the world not to do that to you. I really do. But I can't help with that. I do enough. I advocate for us. I fight. I do talks. I talk about this stuff all the time about personal responsibility and accountability. And then someone says to me, oh, but you're advocating rape culture. No, I'm advocating safety. Please make yourself safe. And then try and change the world at the same time as well. Let's do both together. I was on those fucking pride marches years ago before some of you were born to make sure we fought for our shit. They were not glitter. They were not pretty. They were not nice. They were fucking bricks and stones and kettling and name calling and assaults all the way round. Pride now is all about drugs and glitter and amazing things. It's different. There is some crime in it. Oh, it wasn't like that. So it's still, I believe in fighting for our rights. I believe there are people who say rape culture doesn't exist. I'll have a conversation with anyone about that sort of stuff. Happy to. I've got 4 daughters. Do I advocate them not walking down a dark alley, even though I think they've got the right to? Of course I do. I want my kids to be safe. Do I advocate them wearing trainers instead of high heels? Of course I do, because I want them to be able to run. Do I think they've got the right to wear high heels? I think they've got the right to walk into a fucking nightclub naked, spread themselves on the floor with lipstick saying, fuck me over it. And I still think someone should come up and say, are you sure? Do you want this?
Or do you want me?
Do you want me? Yeah, not you. I'll have that one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's still important, regardless of what's happening. We've got, for me, personal, we've got to be managing both. But you are the only one who can tell that person to fuck off, get them chucked out. My daughter had a situation. It's interesting. The other night at work, everyone was really, really pissed. The top man was utterly drunk. He started to slag off a couple of other people at work. He started to get a bit out of order. He started having a go at her because she's looking for other jobs and they want her to stay and they love her, which is nice. And he's saying, you're fucking jumping the gun. You should do this. You should, oh, for God's sake, you should be doing this and you should be doing that. Started to have a little bit of a go, a little bit out of order because she came in and said, this is my proposition for me to stay. This is what I want. What's your proposition? I went, well, we haven't done that yet. No, but you said you would. Yeah, well, we haven't yet. He went, you're going too fast. And she went, no, I'm not. I'm being offered jobs already. I'm not going too fast. I'm going too fast for you. My kids know how to hold boundaries fairly well, not always. And then what's awful is he then carried on in the night, and my eldest said, I feel a bit funny about this because I've witnessed it, but I'm also aware I was drunk. He started groping more than a couple of the young women's asses. And he's a much older man who's the director of a company. Now you've got something. Now you've got a problem, because it's not a right or wrong. This is about power. He owns the business. What do? Tell you what, I want my daughter to step up. I want her to say something. However, I also respect her right not to, because she's scared, because she's worried about her own job and other things as well. It's so complex. So I want you to look after yourself. I want you to maybe go and speak to someone, grab people who've done it before, look up stuff, research, find stuff that can help you with your guts, your foundations. We talk about CBT, we talk about thoughts, we talk about logic. It's irrelevant. I love CBT, I use it. That doesn't make me a dominatrix. I'm not interested in your cock or your balls. Right, so that's not my thing. Done it before, but not for me. So it's your thought process is easy to say when we're in a logical situation. When your brain is going, oh fuck, and having a problem, your brain doesn't matter in that moment. It's your gut reaction that matters. So what we have to learn to do is, it's lovely to say, oh, I really should say no at this if I look at it, and just life doesn't happen that quickly. Someone's hand's already around your throat. It's all about learning your gut responses of, whoa, fuck off, mate. No. Like, what happened? He's just put his hands around my fucking throat. Believe me, at least 15 people are going to go, what the fuck are you doing? You will find support, but you've got to learn how to do that for yourself. Am I saying that's easy or your fault? 100% no. It is not your fault. It is not a problem. It's something you've learned to do in a certain way. So I want you to undo that learning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We're not responsible for the hand of cards we're dealt. We're fucking responsible for how we play them.
Can I say something? I don't know where that happened or what happened or the sequences or anything like that, but the thing that I want you to know is that that is not okay in any event whatsoever. There be door staff, there be security staff, there be people in there. Please, when a piece
If
of
that
shit
happened
does
here-
something like that to you,
If that happened here,
talk to us, someone.
I'm going to actually go and say, when it has happened here, the person has left immediately afterwards, because if it's one of those activities, because it is so visceral and people will freeze upon the response of it, and it's also edge play. So the last time it happened is probably 3 or so years ago. The guy is very, very well known, and he literally, someone came up and went, we're outside in the smoking area, he grabbed me around the throat, and I'm like, God, that was it. I don't care that it's going to cause me an awful lot of hassle locking horns with this person.
David runs LAM, if you don't know who he is.
From my
that's what we're
perspective,
saying.
the next person he goes and does that to, he's not going to learn. I've got to basically cut them off at the knees and say, no, you're no longer welcome here, because that was edge play without consent. The person is relatively new to events, not acceptable behaviour.
It's not acceptable on anyone anyways, and one of the things that if someone does some out of order or out of line stuff, you're not ruining the day, the experience, the event for them. You are not. You're keeping yourself safe, but you're also keeping everyone else safe.
I think I've also, choking is edge play. I've got a massive writing on everything you ever want to know about choking, from the physiological, biological, how to, all the best ways, the safest ways. And guess what? There is no safe way to choke anybody. Okay, 100%, there is no safe way. There is always a consequence. If you want to take that risk, that's about your risk profile. That's up to you. There is no safe way to choke anyone. The lightest way to choke anyone is to kiss someone, put your mouth over theirs and create a seal, and put your hand over their nose and breathe in and out with their breath. You will create a euphoric feeling. Have you not heard of that one?
No.
Lovely and simple, really nice. No, put a seal. So the seal is really important. And what you'll watch in the other person is they'll start to feel dizzy and start to feel slightly euphoric, because you're changing their CO2 levels to play about, so they've got more carbon dioxide. Yes, go on.
It's also assault. You can.
It is assault.
then
It's
kick in
sexual
self-defense,
and
so you
normal
can
assault.
do something physically back to them.
If
Yeah,
you
but
are
that's
capable of.
If you are
If you are
capable of.
capable of, yeah.
If you're in fight, flight, freeze, flop, all the rest of the
Friend, fuck,
exercise,
yeah.
you're able to.
the first one that I am very outspoken. Very.
Really?
Yes. No one doubts that. I have lost count of how many times I've been sexually assaulted and on faculty.
If you look at the statistics, there was some out yesterday about the amount of people who are sexually assaulted. They reckon over 80% of women have been sexually assaulted at least once in their life.
Yeah.
At least once.
What about the flip side?
Do you know what this is?
Sorry, what were you going to say?
No.
Go on.
There's been a flip side of the coin where I got to conversation with two nice dorms who then turned out to be misandrist.
Mhm.
By that time I was tied up. They sort of violated me.
Oh yeah, and I am totally with you.
I was a male victim in that case, and a lot of drink was involved on their part.
Mm.
Discussion was very good, and I'm not dismissing.
No, it's an as well as. It happens for all genders.
Because I was a man, I felt
We can feel very disempowered as men.
proud and thinking,
Yeah.
you
Shame.
Good said I've been.
Shame. Can I please say, if someone's had one drink, I don't give a flying shit. They do not deserve to tie you up in any way, shape, or form. I run this huge workshop on consent. I talk about the Fry's method, the wheel of consent, and all these different things. And one of the things to remember is that is the person capable of consenting or capable of acting in any way, shape, or form? If that person is pretty drunk, I'm sorry, but they cannot hear you in the same way.
Has anyone not seen
I was
consent is like a
You
cup
were sober,
of tea?
yeah, but yes.
Yeah.
I'm talking about them. They can't do it.
Has anyone not seen consent is like a cup of tea?
I've seen
Okay.
it.
The video.
Please.
Right.
Look at that.
Look on
YouTube,
YouTube, it's
consent is like
brilliant.
a cup of tea. One of the best simple videos that you will watch today.
Would you like a cup of tea? Yes, please. Next week. I've made you a cup of tea because you said you wanted a cup of tea last week, but I don't want a cup of tea this week. And if somebody was unconscious, would you still try to give them a cup of tea? No.
Nah. Yeah, please don't feed unconscious people. Really, please.
It's a brilliant video. However, if you are on FetLife, that link is also, so if you follow me, look for my writing on consent. It covers all of this in massive depth. If you're not on FetLife, get on there. There's some fucking great stuff in there, and it's full of wankers.
What's your name on that?
The Kink Shrink.
The King
Capital T H E, capital K I N K, capital S Shrink.
Horrink.
The King Shrink. It's a set of pencils. Is my black and white pencils is my picture.
You can also find her through the LAM page if you have
Yes, true. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. If anybody wants to learn that ceiling kiss method, I'm not going to kiss you, but I'll teach it to you. If you grab me out there. I mean, if you ask really, no, I'm not.
I was excited for a second.
I'll teach you. You and I have got that sort of relationship. We haven't. That was a joke. Right. So if you've got any questions, like if you come next month and you want to come here, please book up. I'm very lucky. I'm probably one of the only ones who's always sold out. I feel very privileged. Do come along. If you want to come along on the Thursday nights, come along. There's a link to the Zoom. It's free of charge. It's an hour and a half. Next week, I think we're doing STIs, how you get them, everything you want to know about them, all the stigma and shame that's attached to them. We're doing SCAT, which is an interesting one. You know, why are people into it? What does it mean? What are the risks? Should we look at it? Why? And why do have people such an abhorrence towards it as well? And we're also covering stalking behaviour. At what point does somebody come over into that level of stalking, following, bothering, harassing? What does the law state? What you can do about it, and what we can do about that psychologically. So we cover, I mean, can't tell you what we've covered. There are loads of people who come. I mean, Karis, I owe you 100 CPD certificates.
Yeah, you do.
100 hours.
Yeah.
I have to write this fucking certificate. No, it's really easy for me to do. I'm terrible at it. Yeah, I'll write her out. But, you know, we cover so many things, and it's up to you. You ask me what you want me to cover. So it's always your choice. Thank you very much for coming. Feel free to grab me if you, well, you know. But I'm happy. Thank you, and see you later.